Good afternoon. Welcome to CARE Ratings webinar on real estate sector, a paradigm shift amidst the pandemic. I am Amod Khanorkar, Senior Director of Infrastructure Ratings at CARE. I will be host for today's session. We have today with us some of the best industry experts to discuss the subject in detail. It's my pleasure to introduce them to you. I'll go in an alphabetical order. First panelist today is Mr. Shobhit Agarwal. Shobhit is MD and CEO of Anarok Capital. He is an entrepreneur with an experience of 20 years in real estate investments. Prior to joining Anarok, Shobhit led the capital markets division at JLL India. At Anarok, Shobhit is responsible for strategic direction to the businesses of various investment verticals. He holds a BE degree from CEPT Ahmedabad, Masters in Urban Planning from SP in New Delhi, and a Diploma in Financial Management from NMIMS. He is also affiliated with many professional bodies in leadership roles. Welcome, Shobhit. It is a pleasure to have you with us over here.
Thank you.
Hi. Our next panelist for the day is Mr. Kalyan Chakrabarti, who is president of Piramal Realty. I think he's yet to join, but I'll go ahead with the introduction. Kalyan has over. You're joined. Hi, boss. Hi. I missed that. Mr. Chakrabarti has over 25 years of global executive leadership experience across geographies, India, the UK, US, and Europe. He's an expert in real estate and financial services. In his previous stints, he worked with GE in its diverse and global businesses. He's a mechanical engineer from Sambalpur University and an MBA from prestigious XLRI, Jamshedpur. He also holds a master's degree in law. Warm welcome to you, Mr. Chakrabarti.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Thanks a lot.
Third panelist for the day is.
I don't know whether I'm visible.
You are.
You're visible, Kalyan. It's a new platform for me. I don't know what I'm doing.
Now, yes, yeah.
Thanks.
The third panelist for the day is Mr. Venkatesh Gopalakrishnan, who is the CEO of Shapoorji Pallonji Real Estate. Venkat, as a CEO, is responsible for strategic direction of the real estate division at Shapoorji Pallonji Group. He has over 26 years of experience across the real estate and infrastructure industry. Prior to joining SPCPL, Venkatesh was managing director and country head of Westport Capital Partners. He holds a BE degree from Government College of Engineering, Pune, and an MBA from Symbiosis, Pune. A warm welcome to you, Venkatesh.
Thank you, everybody.
Hi. Welcome. Let me now introduce you to the fourth panelist of the day, Mr. Gopal Sarda, who's MD of the Vibe Realty. Gopal is a chartered accountant with over 11 years of experience in the real estate sector. He joined Kolte Patil Developers in 2010 and rose to become the group CEO. He's a founder and MD of Vibe Realty, where he provides project-level expertise and high-value deliveries to the customer-centric approach. Welcome to you, Gopal, to this webinar. Thanks a lot for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Let me now quickly introduce my colleague Sachin Gupta, who's also moderator for the panel discussion for today's webinar. Sachin is the Chief Rating Officer at CARE. He has a total experience of 21 years in leadership positions across credit rating businesses. Prior to joining CARE, he was working with CRISIL as Senior Director, and over there he was heading the corporate and infrastructure ratings. Welcome, Sachin. Once again, a very warm welcome. Hi, boss. Hi. Once again, a warm welcome to all the esteemed panelists and all the attendees and the guests who have joined us today. Thanks a lot for that. Now, a few quick remarks from my side on today's theme. The Indian real estate sector, since introduction of RERA, has gone through critical phase of witnessing a downward trajectory in residential sales and also prices. To make the situation worse, COVID hit and sector almost came to standstill. To provide push to the sector, various stakeholders worked very closely, and sector did come back. And how? Almost rising like a phoenix from ashes. The intensity with which the fortunes of the sector have changed, it has taken many players by surprise. In today's webinar, this is something that we will look into pretty closely. Some of the issues and points that we will look at is how did the stars align to deliver such a strong comeback? How come the sector hit a purple patch? And then logically, is the demand that we currently see in the residential segment, will it sort of sustain? Will back to office bring renewed leasing to the office and commercial segment? What will be the impact of increasing e-commerce on the retail and warehousing segment? Frankly speaking, we have such a wonderful panel that I will not take any more time, and we have experts, who will deliberate on some of these issues. In terms of flow, what we will do is there's going to be a presentation from CARE side where my colleague Divyesh, who's the director of ratings and an expert on real estate, he'll make a presentation on CARE's view on some of these issues. Post that, we'll have a panel discussion. Subsequent to that, we will have a Q&A with the members of the audience. So Divyesh, please, can you please take over and go ahead with the presentation?
Sure, thanks, Amod. Good evening and a warm welcome to the esteemed panelists and participants attending this webinar today. I shall now present CARE's view on the real estate sector, followed by outlook for the sector. The presentation is split into 3 sections. The first section deals with the impact of the pandemic on the different asset classes and recovery thereon. It also covers the key message for each of the asset class. While the second section outlines the opportunities present in the sector for the real estate developers. And finally, we shall end with CARE Ratings' experience of the sector and the outlook for various asset classes. So let's begin the first section with performance of the residential real estate segment. The real estate sector, particularly the residential segment, had already seen turbulent times when the COVID surfaced and brought an unprecedented crisis. It reduced the real estate activities to an all-time low in the decade, but contrary to the expectations, the sector quickly sprang back into action, registering a recovery. The sector had bottomed out, but has now begun to lay a new growth trajectory. With the construction activity coming to a halt, restricted mobility, and concerns over income in the hands of the home buyers, the sector was expected to remain subdued for at least the rest of the year. However, with gradual unlocking of cities, improved customer sentiments, developers pushing sales schemes, and government push to the economy, the sector showed green shoots of recovery in Q3 2020 itself, as reflected in the chart. The sales in the residential segment have always exceeded the launches. However, the trend got reversed post-pandemic as demand got sluggish, but developers continued to launch once the construction activities resumed, although on a lower scale. This shows the optimism and confidence of the developers towards the future. In Q3 2021, the sales and launches have almost equated and surpassed the Q3 2019 figures, which was the pre-COVID and hence a normal year for the industry. This was due to various reasons, of which one of them was improved customer perception towards owning a home. Hence, the sales witnessed were more from first-time buyers and also reflected buyers' inclination towards larger homes. Secondly, the government pushed to the sector through various relief measures, which are covered in our next slide. As we see here, government introduced various liquidity schemes to boost the sector by way of loan moratorium, reduction in repo rate, loan restructuring, stamp duty cuts, etc., which maintained liquidity in the market and made home buying proposition more lucrative to the customers. The comfort of the developers' liquidity due to loan moratoriums and growth in sales due to stamp duty cuts in some of the key markets was observed by CARE while analyzing the developers' performance post-COVID-induced disruptions. The one-time restructuring scheme provided adequate support to the developers post the moratorium was withdrawn. Along with the improved customer sentiment and government stimulus, the recovery in the sector was also driven by increased affordability of homes in the hands of the customers. The all-time low home loan interest rates and price remaining almost stable, as reflected in the charts on this slide, led to rise in demand in the residential segment. The average selling prices in Mumbai and Pune have grown at a CAGR of 5 to 9% only in the past 6 years compared to higher inflation rates, clearly evidencing that home buying has never been more affordable. Due to recent spike in input costs like steel and cement, the average selling prices in top 7 cities went up by about 3 to 4% year on year, as depicted in the chart on the right hand side. However, it largely remained range bound. Now let us look at the performance of key cities. If we look closely at the recent quarter gone by, almost all cities recorded a remarkable growth quarter on quarter in terms of sales and launches. Mumbai Metropolitan Region, or MMR as it is commonly referred to, along with Hyderabad and Pune, accounted for about 64% of the new launches across top 7 cities in this quarter and registered highest QoQ growth as the developers have responded to shift in the home buyer sentiment, launching new projects to capitalize on this surge in demand. The highest QoQ change in sales was witnessed in NCR, National Capital Region, MMR, and Pune, and the possible causes for this growth can be robust hiring by the ITES sector, improved job security with the economy opening up, and growing remote working culture, which has made home buying a growing necessity. The increasing presence of organized developers by way of consolidation is also helping to improve the customer's confidence. Despite increase in sales traction as seen in our earlier slides, the industry has high unsold inventory levels. And as we see in the chart on the left hand side, the inventory level still stands tall at about 6.5 lakh units. Due to increased sales momentum and lower launches, the months required to sell the inventory has steadily come down from 55 months in 2020 to 40 months in Q3 2021. However, the inventory overhang continues to be a major challenge to the industry. Having looked at the residential sector performance and recovery traits in the previous slides, let us summarize the key messages for this segment. The sales have picked up and the trend is estimated to continue in the medium term. However, the pace may slow down once the developer discount schemes and low interest rate stimuli fades away. The developers are reporting better cash flows due to improved sales and collections. Home buyers are averse to buying flats in under construction projects and hence ready to move in inventory is the preference, which is expected to bring down the inventory levels. However, credit challenges to the sector continue in terms of banks and NBFCs lending. Developers typically rely heavily on banks and NBFCs for debt, whereas lenders have set stringent conditions for real estate lending and restrictions on end use. They are lending selectively, making it challenging for the sector. Also, a real estate construction project encompasses a lot of regulatory approvals and processes, which makes compliance management complex and a cumbersome affair, often resulting in delayed projects. Now moving on to the other segment of the real estate sector, that is commercial office space leasing. 2019 calendar year was a record high for the commercial office market with 60 million square foot of absorptions. However, COVID derailed the growth momentum in 2020 with overall absorption falling 35% year on year. As evident from the chart on the slide, Q4 2020 performed remarkably well after 2 dull quarters in terms of absorption of the leasing space, and this was driven by improved sentiments of the people with hopes of potential vaccine availability and also due to absorption of pre-committed build to suit properties by 2 multinational giants. Our ratings experience on the companies in commercial space suggest the collections were forthcoming post-pandemic as well, implying that the need for traditional office space would not lessen in the post-pandemic era also. Commercial leasing witnessed more than 98% collections in most of the grade A office space. There had been a slight dip of about 3 to 4% in occupancy rates due to COVID impact during FY21. Office sector recorded a better performance in Q2 21 as compared to Q2 2020, despite second COVID wave being more lethal as there was improved understanding of the pandemic, availability of vaccines, and better management of construction activities. Q3 2021 turned out to be the strongest quarter for the year, with corporate offices resuming work from office at some locations and IT companies announcing their intentions to resume workplace. This slide shows the major occupiers signing in lease during that quarter. As seen from the chart, share of IT sector, which had declined in terms of new leasing owing to shift towards work from home culture, has revised to level of H1 2019 in Q3 2021. The increased transaction activity from this sector is encouraging as the most significant occupier of office spaces pan-India. The manufacturing sector accounted for a significant 29% of the total area transacted during the quarter, largely due to a 1.5 million square foot transaction by a wireless technology hardware manufacturer. Starting Q3 2021, share of co-working space has also declined, with most of the major companies announcing return to office. As the mobility improves and workplace resumption picks up, overall absorption is expected to grow. The chart on the right-hand side of the slide shows overall vacancy in the commercial office space, which has steadily increased from 2017 to 2021 and is a slight concern. This has happened because of supply outpacing the leasing activity over the years and more so during the pandemic. During the last quarter, it has increased marginally from 15.40% to 16.60% quarter on quarter. The same is expected to remain around 14 to 15% going ahead as leasing activity continues the momentum and supply of grade A offices also increases. Having seen the residential and the commercial segment of the sector, let's look at the warehouse leasing. While warehouses remain an attractive real estate class in India, the impact of COVID disruptions had an adverse impact on the occupier demand, although relatively lesser than the other asset classes. As seen in the chart, despite the fall in transaction volume due to COVID, the growth rate of leasing activities in warehousing between FY17 to FY21 in all the prominent cities has been quite encouraging. The overall demand has grown at a CAGR of 23% during the said period. Due to advent of second wave, the growth of the sector slowed down. However, with the consumption potential of the country like India, the requirement of warehousing expected to increase in the long term, particularly in the grade A warehouses. As can be seen in the chart on the right hand side, the availability of grade A warehouses is limited to few cities, and that also has been the reason of subdued leasing activities, as occupiers are showing a shift in preference for grade A warehouses as they are much better geared to tackle any exigencies in the future. To summarize the key takeaways from the commercial segment, commercial office leasing was stable with high collection and minimal impact on vacancy. Warehouse leasing segment saw almost full rent collections and no vacancies. Going ahead, many developers will diversify revenue streams to bring stability in the cash flow. And to mention, retail sector leasing was most impacted with the steep decline in rental collections and rise in vacancy by 2 to 3%. Now we move to the next section of the presentation, and that being the opportunities available to the sector. So far in our presentation, we have talked about the performance of the sector and the various challenges faced by it. Here in this slide, we have summarized the opportunities available to the sector for growth. The first one being the emerging asset classes, which are already been there during the pre-COVID times, however, were not much prevalent. Post-COVID, there is growing need for co-working spaces, co-living, senior housing, etc., which seem very much relevant now, and are here to stay at least till the uncertainty persists. Also, the growing data volumes have resulted in increased demand for space by data centers and throws an opportunity to the sector. The increasing deployment of technology in the construction space for faster execution is becoming the need of the day. The buyers are looking at timely deliveries and quality assurance, for which technology would be essential. The developers can look towards capitalizing on these investments that will increase the value of the buildings and give customer delight. Complying to green buildings and thus a favorable view from various investors, lenders, and regulators would bring new opportunities for larger players. Now, coming to the last section of our presentation today, which highlights CARE's experience in ratings of the real estate sector. The slide shows broadly the rating dispersion of companies rated by CARE as on latest available date. Among the total companies rated, about 80% belong to BBB and below rating scale. Companies in higher category rating represent the organized sector of the industry, with established parentage, brand image, or diversified presence in more than 2 to 3 states. Operations are professionally managed and they have product diversification like residential and commercial leasing. Finally, they have low leverage and healthy occupancy levels. The modified credit ratio, or MCR as commonly referred to for the real estate sector, has witnessed improvement in the recent period. The MCR is the ratio of upgrade plus retentions to downgrade plus retentions for a specified period. As seen from the chart here, the MCR has improved from 0.89 to 1.06, largely attributed to the gradual economy unlocking process and higher sales and collections registered by the developers. The improvement in ratio in FY22 so far has been attributed to a large number of upgrades in the below investment grade categories and overall steady rating with significant reaffirmations. Now let us touch upon the outlook for various asset classes, which is positive for the residential segment as housing demand is expected to remain buoyant across most segments and geography. Higher income levels across many sectors, improved affordability and desire to own a house will drive demand. The outlook for commercial office segment is stable as the strong hiring by IT, ITES sector is encouraging, but the occupiers are likely to determine the remote working requirements post return to office. For warehousing leasing, the outlook is positive for grade A warehouses as there is a rising demand from e-commerce and 3PL players. Also, we are seeing interest from global funds. However, for retail segment, the outlook continues to be negative as being last to reopen post the pandemic lockdowns. The lease structures are still evolving and there is continued COVID threat from subsequent COVID waves. With this, I end my presentation. Thank you for the patient listening, and I now hand over to Amod.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, maybe Amod has gotten logged off. Happens in technology. So I will take it over. The next step for us is to have this panel discussion. Amod had made quick introductions. Once again, we have Gopal from Vibe Reality, Shobit Agarwal from Anurag, Mr. Chakravarti from Shapoorji, and Mr. Venkatesh. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, my mistake. Mr. Venkatesh from Shapoorji and Mr. Kalyan from Chakravarti from Piramal. My apologies. Let me just get into the discussion. We discussed about in the presentation about the outlook for the commercial sector. And this was one sector which at the beginning of, if we were to go back about a year and a half when the pandemic had just started, work from home was we were beginning to accept it as a way of reality. There was one voice in the market which said it's kind of a death knell for commercial offices. Some of the large IT companies also made some noise about work from home becoming a way of life. Now a year and a half later, and I will like Shobit to kind of respond to this. How do you see the sector is now looking out? Because obviously we saw 19 was a good time, and 20 was kind of moderate. 21 obviously the leasing is not happening that much because the offices are still not fully open. But in terms of future leasing and future construction for commercial real estate, how do you see the outlook, Shobit?
Thank you, Sachin. Good question. I think the jury is still not fully out, but personally I'm extremely bullish on the office sector. If there is a definite need for new grade A offices, we've already started to see activity going up in BKC, Lower Parel, etc., etc. This is basically an indication saying corporates are bullish. I think where we are still struggling is the IT side, and that's largely because our borders are still not open, right? So it's not as if there is no demand for office, but I think once the border opens, travel becomes a little bit more free. You will find that there will be growth plans. So I'm more bullish on 2022, 23 going up and probably stabilizing just as hospitality in 2023, 24. And whatever you've said is true that offline, online, in office, and work from everywhere or anywhere, I think all of this is going to stay. So nothing that we learned during pandemic or adapted is going to go away. But I think we're going to use our spaces more sensibly, build little larger offices, keep some social distance within that. So net, I think offices are here to stay, and there is a big growth just after we open our borders, both on the IT as well as non-IT side.
Got it. That's helpful. Let me get Mr. Kalyan Chakrabarti from Piramal. Question being more on the residential side. Now, residential also has seen a reasonable amount of uptake for various reasons, as we discussed in the presentation. I mean, if we were to talk about Maharashtra market, obviously the stamp duty was one of the kicker. The interest rates are low. But the question which kind of remains in people's mind, on which maybe you can reflect a bit more, is what is the sustainability of this demand? Is it that only there was a pent up demand which has kind of come to the fore, because for many years the demand had been quite sluggish? So what is the sustainability of this demand, the uptick that we are seeing now, especially in the context that we still have a fair bit of unsold inventory, stalled projects, fair bit of capital kind of of home buyers kind of way stuck there? So any thoughts on that, Mr. Chakrabarti?
Sure. So I guess I don't have a crystal ball which is good enough to gaze rightly and predict exactly how things pan out. But here is how my view is. Essentially, one is definitely seeing an uptick, and once the government in Maharashtra, in particular, lifted the SOPs that it had given, we continued to see better momentum. In fact, now numbers are continuing to stay high, which is positive. And not that the entire country saw similar kind of SOPs, and still one is obviously seeing better demand everywhere. So I would like to believe it is more fundamental than a temporary uptick, and I would like to hope that this continues into the long term. I think the ecosystem also is seeing other metrics which are favorable, like you had also said in your presentation, the home loan rates being lower, confidence of employees is higher, the bonuses which people could not earn during the wave one, or the salary cuts people had experienced at that point in time, they have all been restored. So one feels more positive. The other asset classes have done well, and some of the redeployment as you make money, let's say in stock market, ends up real estate tends to be a beneficiary. At the end of the day, I think in an allocation perspective, real estate still continues to hold a decent edge in India. That could be because how our DNA is structured. I don't think our DNAs are going to change in a hurry because of a pandemic. So I do expect things to improve. We seem to be coming off the economic cycle as well. It has been pretty long evening, I guess, of for almost 7 years or 8 years now. We are hoping that every next festival will bring cheers with it rather. And this one seems to definitely have done that. I feel excited about the turnaround. I believe it will be here to stay. And I think many of the changes which happened, which unfortunately did not aid in the recovery, but probably were the right thing to do, whether it is GST or RERA, those are all behind us, and we have more or less seen a stable environment. What is happening is a small improvement and all of that stuff, and big things like Swami and all. You touched upon incomplete projects, so Swami Fund has helped in fixing some of that perception. Having said that, I think the beneficiaries are going to be few. I think in every city there will be 10 to 20 developers because of the benefit of consolidation. The market share is clearly shifting in their favor. So the market will grow, but it will benefit a few.
Got it. Very interesting point you've made on consolidation. Maybe we will cover it as a separate question as well. But from a demand and outlook side, maybe Mr. Venkatesh, from Shapoorji, so one segment, which people in general, even though the real estate overall there was a bit of negative view, till as Mr. Chakrabarti also mentioned, for a long time. But then affordable housing is something, while affordable as per definition of that is kind of a little vague, different people have different sense of affordability in their mind. But overall, that segment, do you think that's, and especially in the backdrop of COVID and all that, because in some ways the general view is bottom of the pyramid got more impacted, and therefore their ability to buy homes gets restricted. But on the other side, we also are seeing, because the prices have remained stable, the affordability in general has improved for the at least the salaried class people. So how do you see that segment playing out, and would that be in a way delta above the overall residential segment?
Yeah, so actually, even if you see in the past, the offtake of the affordable housing, and as you rightly said, you have to put it in context as to what is affordable. But let's say, there is a segment between like 15 lakhs to 25 lakhs, and then there is a segment between 30 lakhs to 70 lakhs, which is the more middle income where we operate. Relatively also for us has performed better even before the pandemic. The reason was that affordability was in focus. People were focusing on ticket sizes. And if you actually see the demand, right, you mentioned the inverse pyramid, that is going to stay for a long period of time. What we have seen, interestingly, post the pandemic, is that the affordable and middle income have continued to do well. But the higher income segments or the higher ticket size segments have also started doing well. So, of course, it's too early to say as to whether this trend will continue for the next 3, 4, 5 years. But the view on affordable housing is that, as a developer, you have to think long term. You have to think over 10, 15 years. And if you're able to manage the costs in the segment, I think it's more how you manage your costs, how you use technology, how you deliver faster. One would continue to be focused on this segment because the demands will have ups and downs, but on an overall basis, this segment will show a relatively more consistent demand than the other segments. But the key thing is that how you manage your costs and how you manage your time cycle of construction.
Correct. And cost is another issue that we will kind of cover later in the conversation. With steel and cement kind of really seeing never before prices, but we will come to that. One question to Gopal. In some ways, what we've realized now is that the people are now more and more buying ready to move houses and all that. And in that context, do you see that the design and the layout of a particular property, location, pricing, that's playing a much more important role, because earlier it was maybe a big chunk of it was an investment demand, and now it's more end use demand. So how do you see that the whole design aspect of the properties, the layout, etc., driving the growth for us?
Thanks, Sachin. I think a very interesting question, being the developer background earlier. So I think design is very crucial from a developer perspective as well as from the customer perspective. See, today the market dynamics have changed so much because earlier the FSI norms were different. Now the FSI norms have changed to a lot. So from a developer's perspective, I think design is the heart of the entire business plan and entire project. Every design has a different level of sales velocity, the average price realization, and the same design has the next level of cost. So one design gives you an X cost, second design gives you a Y cost. And while you are planning the design itself take care about the phasing of the business plan. And under RERA, basically you want some cash flows to be taken out earlier, some cash flows to be planned out over a period of time. And you have your banker along with your private equity along with. So early cash flows will help you to retire them at early stage, and then you generate some returns for you. So basically, design is a holistic sort of a concept for the developer, and developer the larger time nowadays to spend more time, because initial days what happened, they were designing and people were buying anything, and then that much focus was not there because the prices were escalating at a pace and there was not much pressure on the cost. Now we have seen that post 2014, the costs have the selling prices have not increased according to inflation, but the input costs have gone up. So every developer is going too much focus on the design and coming up with the best of the products. Now this is on the developer side. Now look at your initial question was on the ready possession inventory or probably nearing possession or probably under construction. Now from a consumer perspective, I think we all know that obviously demand is there for each stage of the project. Even the launches we have seen are phenomenal sales. Nearing possession is also getting sales and ready possession is also getting sales. Obviously, the most favorable part from the consumer point of view is the ready possession inventory, because then you are out of the delivery risk, you are out of the taxation risk in from a GST perspective or other things, and then you can see the product. So you can avoid the marketing exaggeration and you can see the product, and that's called as a content marketing from a developer perspective, and for their perspective they see their product live. But now having said that, if you want to have choices, then you have to go during the launches cycle. if you are initial phases where your budgets are low, but as and when 2 years, 3 years down the line, because in the salaries you are getting 10%, 15%, 20% increments, then automatically your budget goes to the next level. So you enter into a nearing possession zone. And sometimes you have money, but you don't want to take any risk in life and you have to play very safe. Then ready price is the best inventory. So I feel that while designing the products from a developer perspective, the consumer behavior pattern has changed a lot. Initial days, people were looking for more spaces, more open things. Now, modern amenities are the flavor of the market. So basically, the layout plays a very vital role. If you have a larger layout with all modern amenities for kids play area, for senior citizen, for youngsters, then those kind of large layout with modern amenities are the trend of the market. Sales in a standalone building is really tough, while sales in a layout projects is better because that's the flavor of the market. So I believe design is the heart from a developer perspective and from a consumer perspective. Now we all developers have realized that they want a clear usable carpet. So we focus less of the vestiges should be there in the product. And we know that there is a demand to a 50 lakh product, a 80 lakh product, or 1 crore about product. So each of the location, there is one demand which you have to analyze. You have to analyze the trade market and come up with the products and sell at a pace. So while designing, obviously the business requirement, but the consumer pulse, the consumer likings, the consumer aspects is equally important. So you have to mix it well to give a favorable win-win formula for consumer and developer, and that gives you a desired result. So I think nowadays design is the heart of real estate, and one should take expertise on that. And in the design itself, you know that the FSI consumption, the optimization of cost and the business outcome is also coming. So I think design nowadays is very crucial, very important part. Someone take 6 months to design and sell the product in 18 months. Someone designs in 3 months and then later he takes 3 years to sell the product. So that's how I can conclude that you can take more time while designing the product. You take 6 months and then you launch, but sell in 15 to 18 months rather than launching in 2 months and then taking 36 months to sell the inventory because your studies are not accurate and you have not gathered the right consumer behavior and pulse.
Got it, Gopal. I think very, I would say a new perspective, to see. I'm sure for someone who's executing projects, it's and especially with land remaining expensive and input costs also going up, and that is where I wanted to get Mr. Gopal Krishnan back in. In terms of cost, so while we spoke about demand recovery being there, even though it may be a kind of a fragile recovery, but it's there. Now the costs have gone up now. So is that like, you were barely out of the woods, and again there is a big challenge that you are facing from a profitability and the overall viability of the business perspective?
Yeah, one can say that the life of a developer is always difficult. On one side, we've had good support from demand over the last 12 months. But yes, as you rightly said, the input costs have gone up. But one has to understand that this is a cyclical industry, both in terms of demand and supply factors. And certain things are not in your control. So when we did an analysis, anywhere between 3 to 5% of our margin, we can see at risk if the steel and cement prices continue to be at higher levels. Essentially, there are two ways to look at it. One is a philosophical thing that there has to be an acknowledgement, that the legacy thought process or the indicative range of margins for a real estate developer have changed. They have changed with GST coming in. They have changed. They will change with continued pressure on commodity prices. So you'll have to reset that in your mind as developers, as bankers, as investors, and have a realistic range on those margins. The second is, as my co-panelist mentioned, is value engineering, which is basically a combination of design where you have to optimize areas, you have to optimize heights, you have to optimize parking, all that, which is in one bucket, which is in design. And the second is your procurement efficiencies. So, if you have the scale of projects and if you are able to predict your pipeline of supply over a reasonable period of time, you can get into longer term contracts, higher volume contracts with your vendors, and in some way blunt the increase in the commodity prices, which has come now and which will keep happening So I think the focus on value engineering, which includes your design and your procurement strategy, along with a reset in your mind that the margins have moved downwards by 3 to 5% overall, will help you kind of tackle this issue much better.
Got it. Got it. No, I think at some level, builders will have to kind of find, as you said, I think value engineering is the order of the day, with focus on designs and better layouts, etc. I wanted to get Shobhit back into the conversation. Shobhit, how do you see this whole consolidation? One of the panelists did mention about big becoming bigger. Now RERA has happened. Access to funding is becoming increasingly a challenge. We see more and more DMs. People who have land, they kind of partnering with known names instead of really launching the project on their own, which they may have done 3, 4, 5 years back. So but still there are these deeply stuck assets also. I come from north, where in Noida and even parts of Gurgaon there are large inventory, unsold inventory. So I mean, it's not. Do you see it will play out in a fruitful way, that the consolidation happens and stuck projects kind of get moving again, and at some level maybe 15, 20, 30 developers pan India kind of drive the whole industry, which happens in many of the other industries, if you see?
No, absolutely, Sachin. Gopal, Venkat, Kalyan, all kind of alluded to all of this, saying that due to RERA, due to pandemic, due to various other reasons, cost going out of hand, sales slowing down, obviously who remained becomes bigger, right? So what's remained is actually very healthy developers with good balance sheets, good discipline. They continued the construction during pandemic. They delivered their promise. Whether they made enough money or really boiled down to say, did you deliver? That's a separate issue, right? But all of it, what you started, right? And if you've delivered, you're being showered with opportunities. So there's going to be this whole migration of stuck projects to people who can deliver, right? But in all of this migration, you have to see two things. One, is there enough margin left for the new guy to take it? If there's no margin left, what is the solution otherwise, right? So wherever value is remaining or value is getting created because the market is going up, right, I think it'll start to solve. And for absolutely stuck project, there is a government initiative called Swami. I think somebody mentioned it. There is government looking at it, saying, look, we still have to deliver. So there's Swami to help that sort of situation. But there is so much private work that's happening without naming. Recently, especially amongst listed and even some unlisted guys, are just shopping around, and they're getting really nice deals, right? And you'll hear about it, whether, like I said, if it's listed, it's easier to see what's going on. So consolidation is inevitable. Survival of the fittest is the oldest theme, I guess. I'm not talking anything new. And yes, the market will consolidate. Every day we are seeing new corporates coming into this sector because now everything is streamlined. Max has come in, Bharti is there, Shapoorji is there, Piramal is there, and they're all growing, right? These guys were not there 10 years ago in this business. So new names are getting added. TVS has got added in Chennai. Bajaj is doing something in real estate. So Birla has announced, Mahindras were already there. So corporates with balance sheet, with good governance, good discipline are taking a larger share of the pie, and it will continue like that. I guess some people will get
No,
fatigued.
fair point. Just one this thing on to further discuss it. All these names that you said and all these projects are coming. They're all future. In a way that they will buy land or they will kind of develop it and all that, which is good. Great. The sector is getting these stronger maybe governance and practices and all that. But the stuck projects, I don't think there has been really a formula which has really come out, because those, maybe as you said, if there is no margin, no one will touch it. So maybe those are the projects which have hardly any margin, and they will have to. I think you got the question. Yeah.
Sachin, some projects have now gone through resolution. There's been a few cases in Delhi very successfully done. Likewise in Bombay, again a Bangalore listed company took over a project through NCLT, cleaned up, brought about resolution, is restarting the project. So in real estate, I think the problem is much more difficult because on one side you're being judged by NCLT, which is your financial creditors coming in, but equally the sympathy is with home buyers, right? So you have, so for NCLT to take a very pragmatic view saying, Mr. XYZ, take a loss and buzz off, it's not possible in real estate because, the sympathy vote is always with the buyer, right? So it's a little bit more difficult to balance real
It's
estate
difficult. You're right.
projects. Yeah,
It's
because
not only sympathy.
you're playing RERA. Yeah, you're playing RERA and NCLT. If you follow one,
Yeah.
I have no problems. But I have to handle NCLT
Right.
and I have to handle RERA.
Yeah. I mean, just a point. It's not only sympathy. It's actually they have a seat on the table. So they are sitting along with the bankers.
They have
They are
have a
equal
seat
to
on the
financial
table.
creditors. Yeah.
But
Okay.
I am aware of that. But I think they also have a larger sympathy vote, right? So whatever is their financial problem, that's fine. But usually the sympathy vote tilts towards buyers. So it's
Got it.
slightly more different from a steel company going bust, right? But a real estate guy going bust has a different eye. So that's the problem. Anyways, over to you.
Absolutely. Mr. Chakravarti, one thought, which we have seen for real estate, access to capital, generally, if the sector is not doing well, obviously the profits are not much. So that source of funding is not there. Secondly, banks don't lend for lands. NBFC used to do that. Now they also in the last 3 years have been facing enormous challenges. So where do you see really capital coming in for the growth of the sector? One is, and also on top of that, more and more buyers also wanting to buy ready to move property. So the customer advances, which is again a big segment, a big kind of share of funding can come from there. So if customer advances are not as much there, the banks are not there, NBFCs are not there, so how do you see it really panning out the growth that we look at for residential space?
Sorry, I was on mute. One fundamental change which is happening because of the consolidation is also about stronger developers who have got a track record of not only delivery on the operational side, but also delivering on the commitment made on the liability side of paying their obligations towards the banks or NBFCs that they have taken money from. It is not that the banks have completely walked away, or of course the NBFC space is badly hurt, but the HFC space with LIC or HDFC, these guys are still lending. The good developers still have access to that capital because the capital lent to them is perceived to be far safer. So consolidation is resulting in quality of balance sheet and managements which can deliver on the promise that they have made, both on the asset side of the balance sheet as well as the liability side of the balance sheet. Point number one. Point number two, more expensive capital on the private equity side is of course available. If you are open with it and you need to fund part of your equity through that is always there. And like Gopal said, customers ultimately go for the best designs. You need to get your equation right with respect to design, location, pricing yourself right, providing the right specs, the promise that you make to the customer, and how you keep that promise. The promise to keep ratio has to be maintained with every stakeholder. So I don't have a great answer beyond this. I think the capital markets will have also shown decent promise. Some, a couple of developers have gotten listed. The other developers are getting encouraged to the performance of their stock price. That is another currency also, which I see some of the developers using with issuances getting done. And some amount of innovation we should probably see. REIT coming through has helped some of the developers in lightening their balance sheet. So those kind of things are there. So there is always a capital available for the right developer at the right price, is my philosophy.
Yeah, but at times the price is so high that neither the NBFC gets the money back nor the project gets completed, and that is what we are seeing in a big way. So I'll come to Gopal. You've I know done some interesting structuring in your earlier role at Kolte Patil. So can you throw some light now in the new avatar, wherein we don't have much of NBFCs having very limited appetite. The point on consolidation is fine, that the people are so strong that maybe they will be able to borrow on their name basis or their balance sheet basis. But how do you see it playing out for mid to say larger mid segment guy? Let's leave out the top 10 guys who maybe have a very strong balance sheets, but the mid guy in the real estate space, more on the residential side, how does he really manage the funding?
So Sachin, I think funding is a very interesting subject, and we have my jury expert panel like Shobit and Mr. Chakravarti both have touched upon. So I'll take it ahead from them rather than going from the scratch. So as Mr. Chakravarti also mentioned, I think funding, there are obviously different types of funding. So we all know that basically cost of capital is available between 9 to 12 from banks, and then typically 15 to 18% is NBFC, and then as Mr. Chakravarti also said, basically the private equity is the most expensive capital. So all this, currently we have these three ecosystem available as a part of funding. So now banks typically they have been governed by RBI rules, regulations, and they have limited appetite to take risk. So basically they always prefer a project where you have all the approvals, your cash flows are positive, they discount your sales, they take some escrow arrangements, and then they come up with a safe zone and they give the funding in the form of 10 to 12%. And then NBFC were driving the acquisitions during 13 to 16, and then straight away the land fundings were available. They were taking good risk, and straight away same sort of funding of bank at 16-18% with interest principal repayments were coming. And then the last leg of private equity, they have given a lot of flexibilities over and above that fixed interest and fixed repayments other than NBFC and banks, and they have come up with a structured debt, structured equity, payable variable concepts, and against that they were enjoying the larger share. Initial days they were giving a plain vanilla equity, but slowly they have realized that the valuation game were not there favoring them, and probably in an equity model they are always on the verge of or on the mercy of the developers. So they have started some sort of exit mechanism for themselves by doing a structured debt, structured equity, or payable variable concept. So I think one has to assess their individual project, individual balance sheet strength, individual credentials, and to derive the game, they have to choose one of the funding. Now let's assume, suppose if you have a larger margin of safety, or probably your EBITDA and PAT have a debt, then probably you can accommodate even private equity. But as Shobit has rightly said, what is the juice left in the project? If the margin of safety is too small, if somebody is looking at 15, 18 or 20% sort of margin, then probably obviously private equity funding we won't be able to accommodate. But somebody has done a fantastic land acquisition in a structured manner, wherein the EBITDAs are in the range of 40-50%, or probably they are now valuing the land, the historical land on the current valuation, and then the private equity comes, then they can borrow that money. So I think depends on the stage of the project, risk and reward. If your project has lesser risk, then your cost of capital is coming at a lesser amount. If the project cost, if the project risks are on a higher side, then your cost of capital is more. And obviously your credentials does matter. Like typically today Mahindra, Godrej, like brands, they are getting even at 8.5 to 9.5% funding also. And B and C great developers, they have to borrow sometimes at 15-16% towards the land acquisition, and the same developers are getting at 12% in the post-approval funding. So one has to be very smart choosing the funding. You cannot, like how we say that probably you cannot go wrong in terms of the acquisition. In the similar manner, which funding needs to be borrowed for which project and which is giving you a desired outcome is equally important. You have to assess the depth and you have to consider the funding. And to overcome the challenges, let's assume sometimes if you are unable to raise the money because of your credential, because of your stage of the products, then you have to look for some sort of a collaboration. So nowadays, if you see the flavor of the market, now you have to get the strategic partner for the sales. So sometimes what happens, if you get a strategic partner for the sales, that gives a comfort to the banker, to the private equity, or to the NBFC, and they consider. So typically there are so many strategic partners in the market, they give that confidence of sales, and then the funding comes. Or you have to join the hands of the larger developer in a JV, JD, DMO structured manner, so that your cost of capital automatically comes at a lesser cost, and chances of delivering project at a limited time is more, and then you share and you grow. So these are the only mechanism you have to assess and move on. But yes, I think funding, enough capital is available for the market. It's all about the right project. If you are wrong in the design and sales forecasting, you cannot predict, nobody will join hands. If there is enough margin of safety and you have execution capabilities, delivery capabilities, then obviously people will consider on a conservative approach and they will take that risk versus reward mechanism and you move on. So I think one has to assess and choose one of the available funding, or if funding option is not available, then you should look for a collaboration and move on and complete the project. That would be my suggestion.
Got it. Got it. Thanks, Gopal. Now we can, the audience, they can put in their questions in the in the panel that they can see. There is a place where you can put those questions.
There's this window, and Hi. So this was frankly speaking one of the very fine panel discussion that I have seen. Thanks a lot to each of the panelists and to Sachin. Now we throw open the discussion to the audience. There is a window that is there where you need to key in your questions, and if it is directed towards any particular panelist, please indicate that. So maybe a minute or so we can wait when
No, let them punch in. I have a few questions. We have a good panel, as you said, so I'll not let a minute or two go waste.
In fact,
so
I have one or two from my side as well.
Okay.
But
yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
I want to add. Sachin, I want to just to say, just to add to what Gopal said. In terms of capital availability, I have never seen a project stuck for capital, right? If there is no dearth of capital, it's there. Gopal mentioned at different cost, different solutions can be found. So there's no issue with capital. I think the issue is either around technicalities or around intent. If you have everything clear, the project will find capital at its own pricing, right? So every project is different, but you'll find the pricing. There's no issue on capital. So I don't want to leave this. I do want to give confidence saying capital is not in short supply, as was the case pre-pandemic. Today there's no shortage of capital.
And Shobhit, is that somewhere RERA kind of playing a big role here? Because as per regulation, you cannot really play with the money which is kind of there in the system, right? So the money is specific to the project. So do you see that playing out? I mean, maybe RERA was a far-reaching thing, but there were so many other events which happened along with it, your DeMon, your GST, and now COVID. So we may not have really seen the net delta effect of RERA on the real projects.
So two things, we've been tracking this space. So one, I'm happy to report that wherever RERA has been adopted in spirit, like is the case in Maharashtra, it's also the case in Bangalore, it's also the case in UP, which is Noida, actually sales have gone up. So first of all, it is giving confidence to the buyers, saying there is somebody looking after us. Second, I'm not sure whether RERA alone is responsible, but in general, markets have taught people saying be disciplined, follow the financial discipline. You take money in the project, you ensure it finishes, and then you have fun with the rest of the money. Don't take out money in the middle of the project. And this has been the learning of the decade. It is not RERA alone which also enforces. What RERA does is doesn't allow you to take the money out. But I don't think there's anybody with the right mind today that is even thinking about saying, I will take some money from one project and put it in the others, as was the case maybe 15 years ago. I think all that is stopped and out of the window.
Got it. So one question I had, for Mr. Chakravarti, and this is, we've been talking more about affordable housing and other things. What about the luxury segment? That's, I mean, as I see it, that also saw an uptick. And do you see that again sustaining? Because that's where really the builders, I'm assuming, make the most margins. So is that kind of back in a good way on the residential side?
Sorry, I think it's a bit early to say whether the luxury per se is back or not. It also depends on how you define luxury. I think if you look at 10 crore plus kind of a segment in Bombay and the corresponding price point probably you can pick in other markets, I do see that taking a little bit of a time, though there is more wealth getting generated due to other asset classes performing. So maybe there will be a wall of money which would come into that space. But I think the jury is still out to steal from Shobit's words which he used earlier on that one. I will not say that that is a segment which is waiting to get off the tracks. However, the mid-market segment is definitely what one is seeing a strong positive right now.
Other question I had, and that's for the entire panel, whoever wants to kind of take a go at that. Till about 5-7 years back, real estate was a good investment option as well. People, even salaried people who had first homes, they were looking at buying second home, who had 2 homes was looking at third home, because at some level it was a real asset and people were putting in money, they were borrowing and, investing money at the pre-launch stage and, kind of giving that money as the project developed. And I mean, depending on how the developer was, they got the possession, or in some cases they did not. Now, is that, and especially since you mentioned that more than 10 crores, those people already have very good houses, right? So for him to buy another 10 crore house, unless it is for self-stay, there is hardly any demand going to be there, because if those people are not looking at buying that for investment. So the big question is the real estate and, mostly on the residential side, plots, flats, units, whatever, has that lost its sheen as an investment option for people? I mean, I will. I mean, anyone who wants to take it can take it. It's an open question.
So I just add Sachin here, and then others can add. So I think real estate has never lost its charm of being the most safest asset. So far, if you see, there are hardly 5-6 commodities available in the Indian digital market. Typically, silver, gold, share market, and then probably real estate. There is so much of fluctuations. Look at the stock prices, look at the gold fluctuation, look at the silver fluctuation. But by and large, everybody will agree here that over a period of 5-year to 6-year cycle, I think real estate has always showed some sort of escalation. I am not talking about the high returns, but even the principal is always been looked at as being protected. Now, people believe that after certain change, because Indian mindset is there, because Indians are believing in savings, Indians believes in the wealth, not like the overseas market. So everybody wants to create some wealth, and they want, at certain age, they want to have some safe wealth. So some people even feel that even we are not getting the desired return, but the principal should be always protected. So real estate has never lost its charm of investing. Yes, obviously certain investors which were active during 2010 to 2014, they were not so active between 14 to 2020 because of uncertainties, delivery, sort of lack of confidence on the deliveries, and then the market have not seen the uptick of prices, while the prices have been corrected from 2014 to 2021 by some percentages, and the desired returns were not there. But now after 2004, look at the housing loan has come down from 11 to 6.5%. Today, at 6.5%, even the retail investors are active. If you are buying a ready possession property, you get a 2.5 to 2.75% as a yield, a rental yield. Then balance left of 4%. Out of that 4% also, typically 1% you get as a tax saving because of the interest you can claim towards your salaries or some other part. So then 3-4% cost of capital from a retail investor vis-a-vis over a period of 5-year cycle, we have always seen that there is some sort of an infrastructure change or some announcements, and automatically the prices goes up for those specific micro market, and you see over a period of 5 years 35 to 40% properties are appreciating. So you are net to net 3 to 4% year on year basis positive on the bank's money. So that helps the retail investment active, and I think I am bullish that the next 2-3 years time probably the retail investor will be active, the large investor will be only active, depends on the deal they are getting from the developer, and we see that 3 to 4% price escalation may come over a period of next 5 years. So real estate is a favorite form of investment for the Indian community, and it will remain like that, and home buying will never stop. And since there is so much of demand which is fluctuating in an economical cycle, it's a matter of time. Entry exit may dent you, but in a long run period you will always positive
Got it, Gopal. You are speaking really passionately. I can understand someone who spent his maybe most of his life on the real estate side. Anyone else, or maybe now we have got some questions from the audience. One question in a way attached to what we just mentioned, what we were just discussing. That the question is there room for a price rise in the residential segment, and if so, by how much? Any takers? Maybe Shobhit, you wanna take that? It's a
I'm
speculative
probably going to upset.
speculator.
I'm probably going to upset Gopal on this one, but yeah, look, I think there will be a price rise. Is given, it's for certain, because it has to adjust for all the price rise on the cost side, on the approval side, etc. So there will be, but whether we are going to be able to beat inflation, I'm not sure. I think first the volumes will go up, and if the volumes go up, thereafter pricing will go up, right? But in long term, it is going to go up. I'm not that bullish in terms of it beating the inflation. Number one. Number two, just to sort of start a little controversy, I think, yes, there is this cool investor base, and I hope it comes back to real estate. But our equity markets are so much more mature from last decade. We also have REIT product. If you really want income returns and you want some appreciation, just invest in these REITs. You don't need to go through the friction of buying a physical home, paying property tax, getting rents, getting loans, and then undoing the whole damn thing. It is very, very difficult in India to buy a home and then sell it. Self-use is very different. So my suggestion is that REITs is a good alternative if you just want to play real estate, income and appreciation.
Got it. I think it's a good balancing thought, Shobhit. One question that has come, and maybe Mr. Gopal Krishnan, you can take. We discussed about the cost pressures. The specific question is, what changes in operating margins have occurred due to the raw material price increase, and if possible, please provide average margins for residential and commercial sectors. Difficult one on the indicative margins, but yes, you can give the delta.
I think, the increase in steel and cement prices have put the margins under pressure by 3 to 5%. Indicative margins on residential were 25 to 30% earlier, but now will be more in the range of 20 to max 25%. Of course, if you're doing high-end projects, especially in Mumbai, you can expect higher margins, but there are higher risks also, because there is approval risk, there could be redevelopment risks, etc. But as a developer, if you are looking at a range of 20 to 25% margin in residential and you're working towards that, I think you would have had a good result. Now, coming to commercial, essentially it's in two parts. One is a yield which you will get, and second is a capital appreciation as an investor. The yields will be in the range of 7 to 8%. Depending upon the capital rates compressing, you will get probably another 6-7%. So you would get it in the range of 14 to 15% on lease property. Of course, if you're taking a development risk on commercial property, the margins will be much higher, because you're actually making money on the development margins also. That will be in the range of 18 to 20%.
Okay, got it. Next question, Mr. Kalyan Chakravarti. It is on emerging asset classes, especially on co-living spaces. Are they here to stay? I think what the question asker means is this gonna develop? Because we don't really have much of co-living spaces yet. So how do you see that playing out?
Since you specifically mentioning about co-living, I do believe it is here to stay, and I think with different developers, while they have taken a little bit of a knockdown, the startups and others who entered into the space due to the pandemic and the consequent impact, I do see the value of one such product. I do see that early stages of one's career, in particular when you have no children or probably you are alone, there is a predictable quality of life that you can get. You pay slightly higher for that, and you can get to live in a community which of like-minded people. People are willing to pay for that. I do see a demand for that. So I don't see any reason why co-living per se won't exist or thrive. Of course, it will be heavily location specific development. It needs to be nicely designed. So not every co-living will work well. And co-living is also has a significant services component, unlike a pure play residential. and that services component will determine whether co-living will succeed or not. So a developer who can build a great building, build a great designed building, does not necessarily mean that he will be able to run a great co-living space. The kitchen services or other allied services which come to keep the people engaged, keep the people feel happy and distress themselves after they come back from office. What services are you providing and how good are those services will effectively decide who is the winner.
Got it.
I have no doubt in my mind that co-living will succeed.
Got it. Last question to Shobhit, before we kind of put this on close, and maybe Amod has another question after that. So Shobhit, in terms of the emerging asset classes, we discussed about co-living spaces just now. There is whole talk about warehousing, being the next growth. This thing because you look at the overall real estate sector, which spaces do you see? Maybe one or two where you believe that the demand will be, those will be like the safe havens as a sector segment.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the initial presentation you showed did show warehousing as the beneficiary of all of this pandemic. Just the way there's been technology adoption, unreal levels of technology adoption, I think warehousing has leapfrogged. What they would have achieved in 5 years, they've done it in 2 years, right? So that segment is going to stay simply because nowadays with 20 minutes, 10 minutes delivery, there is no other option but to start building more and more warehouses. I think next year warehousing leasing will beat the office leasing on gross levels. So we are that bullish on warehousing. Other than that, the next big change is going to be data centers. I think e-distribution of information is important. I think our own government haven't said it, but they're planning that hopefully next time there's an election, you can vote from comfort of your home through your mobile. It will require technology, it will require data, it will require data centers. So I think that's the next big one that's going to come in. And it's just scratching the surface right now. So it might be a very large sector in over the next decade.
Okay, great. Thanks, Shobhit. This brings us to the close. We don't have any more questions. Anyone wanting to make any points which maybe you feel is very relevant?
Sorry, I want to quickly ask a question or two. Two questions from my side, and because we have such a panel with a varied perspectives, where they come from. Two things. One is in terms of say international best practices. Where are we as an industry? Where are we? I mean, how close are we to the best practices in say some of the markets which are very developed in this aspect? Be it regulation, be it the construction practices, be it the way the deals are done, and so on. So that was first, and then whoever wants to take it. And second, we are close to budget. So what is it that you think is going to be asked from the budget, or what you think the government will do as far as the real estate sector is concerned? These two things. Whoever wants to.
I can take the first half a little bit, though I have got slightly on a lighter note. I think it is good to shoot for international best practices, but India practically, as far as real estate is concerned, is a multinational corporation. If somebody like Venkatesh is present in so many cities, he's an MNC. The regulations are substantially different. The customer behavior is substantially different. The language is different. When you do a title deed, it is completely different. There is nothing which is practically common other than probably Shobhit Agarwal who cuts across all the markets. But, so there is no really best practice. You need to shoot for internationally. I think locally, if you can normalize, standardize a little bit, that is a big deal by itself. Having said that, I think in commercial space, definitely there is a lot of best practice which has come in already and will probably continue to do so. Your grade A buildings, for example, how we build it, how we kind of think through planning and design, that has been coming into the Indian market for a while. Since the prices have last cycle when it went through the roof, I think one good thing it did was to bring international best practices on the design and development side. Of course, you need to make sure that designs are locally suitable. But all big developments now, you would find one big designer internationally who is collaborating with a local guy to deliver you a good concept design at the least. So there I definitely see. construction technology also in the last, I would say, decade and a half, has seen lot of convergence. Again, keeping in mind the locally available construction material is leveraged, and cost considerations are kept in mind, viability is kept in mind. But lots of technologies have come from abroad, whether it is in foundation engineering or structural engineering or whatever you may call, finishing, various kinds of stuff. And of course, on use of technology per se, IT, I don't think there is anybody better than us. I think the SAP or SFDC that we use, given the volumes at which we operate, and given the complexities and the fact that we are present in so many markets, makes us probably the best users of some of these technologies. Maybe the international market should take some of the best practices from India and use back at their countries.
Amod, I'll take the second question. Just again on the lighter side, as Kalyan said, joke is that regarding the budget, you may ask, but you don't get anything. That, from a real estate perspective. So typically the focus is on affordable housing, and that should be the focus of the government. So, the other segments, typically you don't get much. Again, on affordable housing, they will continue, and, whatever policies, whatever measures they have taken in the past, they typically extend it. Hopefully, I think of course, it's not a budget ask, but this entire pass-through on the GST, which was discontinued some time back, has hit the developer margins quite a bit. And we hope that the government reconsiders that and, allows it at least in some form or shape. So I think that's what the overall, budget perspective is.
Great. So
Great. Thanks
a lot.
Thanks.
I
Yeah.
think
Thanks, Amod. So with that, we bring this panel discussion to close. And Amod, please close the session with the vote of thanks.
So thanks a lot. I think this was a wonderful discussion. Thanks to each of the panelists, Venkat, Kalyan, Gopal, and Shobit, for taking out time out of your busy schedules and joining us here today. Thanks are due to my colleagues Sachin, as well as Divyesh and Monica, who Sachin moderated and Divyesh presented. Thanks a lot for that. A big thanks to the members of the audience who, out of their busy schedules, have chose to join us today and attend this webinar. Really thankful for that. With that, we come to end of this event. Goodbye and have a good evening ahead. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.